I mean, I think it's one of the most extraordinary phenomena in all history is the way suddenly, from one moment to the next, one city or small country is touched by the angel's wing. And then, just as suddenly, it's gone. We divided history into 5 chapters: the ancient world, the first 1,000 years of the Christian era, the Middle Ages, the early modern, and finally the age of the modern city. And we tried to think about which would have been the great cities of the world in each of these periods. It allowed us to put in a lot of rather surprising places which wouldn't have got in otherwise, like Timbuktu, whereas places like Toronto are out. I think in earlier history, you see, rivers were much more important actually than seaports, because seaports meant the sea, and the sea was a very treacherous thing in the early, before anybody knew anything really very much about shipbuilding or navigation. They were much the best places to build your cities on. It was only really after about 1000 AD that shipbuilding got really very much better, and people started learning the arts of navigation. Venice, obviously, the top of them all. I mean, Venice had this huge arsenal, which was capable of turning out a ship a day in the 16th century. The King of France at that time, and they invited him to go to the arsenal at dawn and to watch the keel of a ship being laid. And he went back at sunset, and there was the ship going down the slipway, fully rigged, fully armed, fully manned, fully provisioned, ready to go. Taken 16 hours. 15,000 men working, every man doing his one job, exactly what he had to do, which is just one thing. And so the whole thing was completely regimented. But it was mass production. It was the first mass production in the world. In the last 10 years of the 15th century, the 1490s, these 2 tremendously important things happened. Columbus discovers the New World. Almost at the same time, just a couple of years later, Vasco da Gama discovers the route to the Indies around South Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, which means that you can load a ship in Lübeck or Hamburg or London and take it all the way to China without transshipping. It made a colossal difference for everything. It meant the Atlantic obviously became far more important, and Spain and Portugal became far more important, because they were the principal beneficiaries of the New World in those days. The principal reason for exploring was to increase trade. Well, for Spain and Portugal, they liked to think it was to spread the gospel. But I think gold was rather more important than the gospel for most of them, even then. It wasn't until the age of the modern city, indeed, that we put in eventually Montreal, Washington, New York. They would have been heard of in 1800, but they would not have heard of Los Angeles, which is in. They would not have heard of Chicago, because Los Angeles, although a very, very old city originally, because of course the other thing that one forgets is that the first Western civilization in America was Spanish in the Southwest, which predates the Pilgrim Fathers by 100 years. It was a village, and then suddenly, in the beginning of the 20th century, suddenly once again it explodes, largely because of Hollywood, of course. And similarly, Chicago grew up on the railways. 1860, 1870 was the time when suddenly Chicago swelled up and became one of the great cities of the world. Before that, very few people in the West had ever heard of it. I think that almost every great city tells its own story and points its own moral.